way of Will John.
Guys, welcome to the podcast. Big shout out to WOWJ, our lovely sponsor, and even on the biscuits and tea side, shout out to Sport Tea. We have with us today an unbelievable guest, one that I'm very, very happy. Guys, I have to say, this is probably, without even saying it, already my favorite podcast, and we haven't even gotten going. So, Tom Campbell, physicist, welcome. Thank you so much for being here, man.
Well, you're welcome. Glad to be here, William, or William John.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Oh, you're the first person who's actually gone with my full name. Most people in the U.S. they just go Will John because of the one syllable thing. But so you are a guy who's done quite a bit. You've lived a very, very interesting life, and I just kind of want to. A majority of our fans are involved in sport. And they're doing all sorts of different things. But I would love for you to just go ahead and give us the best background you could on who you are, what you've done, consciousness research, your work in physics, and what you're up to now. Just kind of a general overall of who you are before I get into all these cool questions that I think people will be interested in.
Okay, and I'll try to keep it fairly short. Otherwise, we could do the whole hour just on this. Let's see. Well, I'm a physicist and I'm also a consciousness researcher. And I started both of those careers at about 1970, close to that time. At the time, I was in graduate school, working on my PhD in experimental nuclear physics. And I was probably about 3/4 of the way done with that. And I started meditating. I learned to meditate with transcendental meditation. I saw it a notice pinned up on the physics building door that said, learn to meditate, $25, introductory price for students. Go longer without sleep, lower your blood pressure, It had this whole list. But the thing that caught my eye was do without so much sleep, because as a graduate student, I was working 12, 14 hours a day, and doing without so much sleep was something I needed. So I learned to meditate, and I found out that I could debug my software in a meditation state very, very efficiently. I could just see in my mind the printout and let it scroll by. And as there was a line that had problems, that line would just show up red. And this was like, wow, let's see if that's real, So I go up to my deck, because those are the old days with decks of cards. I go up to my deck of cards. And sure enough, that line was the thing that had the error. So I started debugging my code in a meditation state rather than actually looking at the cards. And I could do it, 100 times faster. In those bad old days with card decks, you didn't have a lot of help from the computer of finding out where your problems were. The computer just shut, refused to do your job, and that was it. You didn't get any more information than that. Mostly our information was, when did it stop printing? So you had a lot of print statements in there to give you some idea where it quit. So That helped a lot. And that opened up my mind as a physicist to another whole reality. Before, I had the typical scientist viewpoint of reality, and that if you can't measure it, then it doesn't exist or it isn't important. In other words, measuring means you can interact with it. If you can interact with it in some way, then it's a real thing. If there's no way you can really interact with it, then it's just a mental thing. It's a mental construct. It's in your imagination, a hallucination, an idea, but it's not really a thing. It's not a physical thing. So that was my idea of reality. And I think most scientists today still have that, have that idea. That's what reality is. You can't measure it, then it just isn't important or it doesn't exist. Well, that was obviously not true of me debugging my software. Something else was going on, because that wasn't a material thing. It was entirely a mental thing, but yet I was doing something that was in this physical world with physical cards. So there was a bleed through between the two, between the mind and the matter realms, if you will. So when I finally get out of graduate school and I take a job, my boss throws a book at me and says, Tom, tell me what you think of this. And it was Journeys Out of the Body by Bob Monroe. What a strange thing for having some engineer, he was an engineer, give me this book. But I read it, And I told him, well, if that's real, if Bob really had those experiences, because Bob did some things that tested the reality of it, and it tested real for him. If that's true, then wow. But what can we do about it? What can we know about it? It looks like it's specific to very certain people and isn't really something available to us or to anybody. So then,
sorry to cut you off. I don't even know if we should even clarify more specifically what it means to read. I mean, I know I have read Bob Monroe's books, but maybe to some of the people who are there, they don't know specifically what sort of experiences you're referring to.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe you could touch on that.
Yeah. Thanks for interrupting. I needed to say that. Anyway, Bob Monroe wrote 3 books. The first is Journeys Out of the Body. And the second was Far Journeys, and the last was Ultimate Journey. And these books were written like a diary. He had these experiences. He didn't know what to make of them. He thought he was going crazy. So he went to a psychiatrist and said, am I nuts or what? And the psychiatrist couldn't find anything wrong with him other than he had these experiences. So he just kept a log book. He kept a journal of what it is he did, and eventually he turned those into a book. And he's the one that coined the term out-of-body experience. Up until that time, there were other words for it, but out of body just was a little clearer and didn't have any kind of history tied to it, and no religious stuff tied to it. So he just called it out of body. That was simple. So he had these experiences where he was aware and functional, but he wasn't in his body. First, he thought he was in a dream, but then he interacted with the physical world, and he could see the physical world, and he could see what was going on there, and then come back and check out and see if that really was going on there. And it was. He actually pinched a person, I believe, and that person felt the pinch and got a bruise right in that spot where he pinched them. So he had some interaction with the physical world that let him know this wasn't just a dream. It was some kind of special dream or some kind of other thing where he was an active being with all of his mental capacity, but he wasn't in his body, but he could interact with the physical world. So that's kind of the out-of-body thing. And that was published back in the late 60s, early 70s. That's when his first book was published. So anyway, my boss had read this book, was interested in it, and he was an engineer, a science guy. So his idea was about the same as mine. Yeah, very interesting, but how can you tell whether there's somebody just trying to make money to sell books, so he thinks up some kind of really bizarre thing, to sell books?
Scam.
Or what? Yeah, is it a scam or what? So he found out where this guy lived. It wasn't that far from where we worked. So a bunch of us, half a dozen of us, well, more than that, probably a dozen and a half of us got in cars, went out to see Bob Monroe. And I'm thinking, is this guy a charlatan or what? So I got to meet him. And when I got to meet him, he was a very straightforward guy. Matter of fact, he had a personality like an engineer. He was very, very detailed, very specific, wasn't trying to hustle, wasn't trying to convince anybody of anything. And he took us up to this lab he had just built, but hadn't really done anything with it yet. He didn't know what to do. And he showed us around, told us that what he wanted to do was to have a lab that studied consciousness and find out what this out-of-body thing was, so that he just wasn't the crazy old man that had funny experiences. He wanted to put it on the scientific map. So myself and a friend of mine said, well, hey, we'll be your scientists. We'll work for free. And if you teach us what you know about going out of body, because if we just listen to you, that's one thing. But if we experience it ourselves, that's a totally different thing. So he agreed. And that started myself and Dennis Metternich going out about 15 to 20 hours a week, spending time in Bob Monroe's lab with Bob Monroe. And Bob Monroe, we had to build equipment. There was nothing in that lab. So we started building equipment and borrowing things from the universities that we had just gotten out of. Anyway, so we'd spend some hours building equipment, and then we'd spend some hours with Bob teaching us what he knew and about going out of body and trying to teach us how to do that. Well, he was a pretty good teacher. Within 6 months or so, Dennis and I were both going out of body when we wanted to, kind of on demand. And my job as the physicist was to try to figure out what's going on? How does it work? What's the theory? What's actually going on behind it? What are we doing here? And what are its limitations? What else can we do? What can't we do? And why? So that was my job, to figure it out. Dennis was an engineer, and he mainly was designing and building equipment and doing other parts of it. So fast forward about a decade later, I stopped going out to Bob Monroe's because I took a job in another state, another place. And besides that, Bob Monroe's lab had grown to be so popular that everybody wanted to come and experience out of body. And Dennis and I, instead of being researchers, we became trainers. So that wasn't really what we wanted to do. So we kind of trained other people, and we slipped out the back because, after all, we'd been working like half time there. We had young kids and wives and jobs and other things that we were kind of close to being burnt out on a time wise anyway. So then I parted company, and I spent the next 35 years after that trying to put it all together. So here I have the ability to get in this out-of-body state and do science. In other words, I can get out of body and I can do something like remote view, like Bob did, see what's going on at a certain place. Or I could interact with things, or I could do healing, or I could do all kinds of things from there. And I could do that in a way that I could replicate it. So I could get back in exactly the same state in exactly the same way, change one variable and see what difference did it make. Then do that experiment 50 times. Then put that variable back and change another variable. And kept doing this, thousands and thousands of times until I pretty much had an idea what variables did what was important, what wasn't, and came up with this theory. Now, by then, I'm, in my 50s, instead of my 20s, which I was when I first met Bob. I was in my late 20s. So that's some years later, I finally thought I understood the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality. So I wrote the books, My Big Toe, and I published those in 2003 in February. So that's kind of who I am. I'm a guy who had about a 35-year-long career as a physicist, a working physicist, worked for Missile Defense, worked for NASA, and worked for some other companies that had contracts that needed a physicist for. Got to become a pretty well-known expert in the field in simulating large, complex systems, which is what I did for NASA and what I did for Missile Defense, both. So that was my career in physics. And all the while, on the side, I was also a consciousness researcher, learning about consciousness. So I had, after a while, this bunch of facts that were consciousness facts. Here's the facts that I know about consciousness from my own research in consciousness. Here's the facts that I have from physics, being a physicist. Now, I want one model that'll explain all of that. Because right now, those two things are totally separate. There's this big wall between them. I'm a physicist. We don't do consciousness. Consciousness is subjective. We only do objective. So, that's not in my bag. So I wanted to get one understanding that would do the whole thing. Well, what I found out was once I did that understanding that was basically really a theory of consciousness helped me do physics beyond what physicists could do. So I could finally derive from first principles quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is no longer a weird science. It's a logical science, just like any other science. I could tell the physicists why particles need to be described as probability distributions in quantum mechanics. I could tell physicists why the speed of light has to be a constant. I could solve all of those paradoxes in physics, and there's a whole basket full of them in physics that say, well, we know the world's like this, but we have no idea why. It just seems to be a mystery. And now I can explain all those mysteries. So I ended up doing better physics, not only better consciousness.
So that's actually, I now that you've kind of laid that out, I'm curious if you could, for so many people out there that have got to, you're going to have a perspective, I would imagine, that is going to vary so much differently than what is generally propagated in our world right now, with a general understanding, or the general consensus, I would say, is that the materialistic worldview is more or less the dominating worldview of our time. And it's very hard for people to kind of break that mold, and to even want to explore. I mean, I think there's something like 25%. I saw this statistic. I'm not sure if it's true, but 25% of the people have had either some sort of dream experience, out of body experience. They've had something possibly that they just can't explain, or that at least the materialist or the materialistic worldview doesn't necessarily explain properly. So I would say to you, then, my first kind of question on this thing, because I have it's two-part, but the first one would be, if you could give the people out there just a general sense, and I know this is what you do in your book, a general sense of how does reality work. And I've seen a couple of interviews with you explaining a general consensus of how we relate to the world, how things are happening, how your decisions influence certain things, and how and you do a very good job. One of the things that I've liked about the interviews that I've seen, you do a good job of obviously relating it to your work, and as being an engineer and physics, and you do a lot of labeling. I've seen you correlate things with the games or the gaming world as well, because it kind of makes that sense easy. So my first question would be, could you kind of give us a general sense of how things are working as you see it? And then the next, you know what, I'll hold it, because I now don't want to go on a tangent. Let me just leave it right there.
Okay.
If you could.
Yeah, let me give you a real short explanation of really what is reality and how does it work. Well, physics had come to the point back about 100 years ago in the 1920s, come to the conclusion, because of the double slit experiment, that reality was information-based. That's because depending on the information that they measured, they'd get one result. If they didn't make that measurement, they'd get a different result. And they came to this conclusion, but they didn't know what to do with it. It was just weird. That's when they started calling it weird science. But this idea that the reality is information-based has been around a long time in physics. Physicists just haven't known what to do with it. Well, what that means is, if saying reality is information-based is the same as saying reality is computed. Saying the reality is computed is the same thing as saying that this is a simulation, which is the same as saying it's a virtual reality. So right now, of course, there's lots of books out there now. It's kind of a hot subject right now. Are we living in a virtual reality? Well, the answer to that is yes, we are. But now most of the people who agree with this idea then go off on some pretty sketchy ideas of how that works out. And my ideas are very different. My idea is that our reality is very much like any video game. Okay. Now, in a video game, there's a couple of things. So let's take World of Warcraft or Sims or No Man's Sky, or some of the video games out there that are virtual reality games, multiplayer virtual reality games. Now, some of the things we'll know that if you're a player of that game, what you do is make all the choices for your avatar. You make all of his choices. And if you take the avatar's perspective, then the avatar's consciousness, which is you, the player, has to be non-physical to the avatar. In other words, you, the player, can't be inside the virtual reality playing the game. You have to be outside that virtual reality. So from the avatar's view, its consciousness is outside the virtual reality. Also, the computer that is computing that virtual reality game has to be outside of the virtual reality. It can't be a part of the virtual reality. It's computing the virtual reality. So it has to be outside that virtual reality. So we have the avatar, the character in the virtual reality, like a barbarian, say in World of Warcraft. And that barbarian, from his viewpoint, the computer computing his virtual reality and his consciousness both are outside. Well, here we are, human beings walking around here, and our body is the avatar. And our consciousness is outside of this reality. The consciousness is making all the choices. And the computer that's computing it is outside of this reality. That's computing our bodies, if you will. So that matches up exactly with what the physicists have been saying, that this is a computed, information-based reality. And our science tells us that has to be true. In other words, a long time ago, science taught you that an electron was a little piece of mass with a charge. Well, that's not true. Today, they'll tell you it isn't a piece of mass with charge. There is no particle. It's a virtual particle. It just exists in probability. And depending where you find it, you have to make a measurement. The measurement creates the particle. You say, well, that's exactly what you get in a virtual reality. Okay, so
Gotcha.
Now that's a big idea. Like you said, it's hard for the average person to get their mind wrapped around that. They hear that, okay, my body is the avatar in a virtual reality. Oh, Jesus, that's crazy. That couldn't possibly be true. What a wacky idea. That guy must be nuts. What kind of drugs is, he taking? But it actually answers all these outstanding questions. And physics has known for a long time that they had some basic things missing. Some of their basic stuff was just unknown and just kind of weird and crazy. And what they needed was a new perspective, just a new perspective in which everything then made sense. And this is it. Virtual reality is that new perspective. So
Wow.
I talk about the larger consciousness system. That's source. That's just everything. And we, you and I, we are individuated units of consciousness that are a part of that system. We're just subsets of that system. So the system is the source, and that system is a information system. Consciousness is about information. And that's not so hard to grok, because what are you conscious of? Well, the only thing you're conscious of is your sense data. Sense data is just information. Take away all your sense data, and what are you conscious of? Nothing, except you exist as consciousness. You have awareness, but that's it. So your reality, this physical world, can be reduced just to sense data. That's all it is. It's information. So consciousness is about information. Consciousness is awareness. Awareness of what? Well, that what is information. That's what you're aware of. And then you interpret that information as being this physical reality. And you learn how to do that from birth. You look around. Oh, that's mom. That's an apple. This is my house. You get the information in a data stream from the consciousness system, and you interpret it as this picture. It's a virtual reality, a multiplayer virtual reality. And with that crazy sounding viewpoint, you can now explain mysteries that are existing in neuroscience, in biology, in physics, in psychology, all of these things that, well, we know it's that way, but it sure is weird. We don't know why. All of those things come together and are known and understandable just by changing your perspective to being a virtual reality. So crazy as it sounds, it works better than any other theory that's out there. It's better physics, it's better biology, it's it's better science, and it's better metaphysics.
So one of the things that I have also found really interesting, and that I've taken and always wanted to adapt, because when we have kids that are wanting to, say, learn how to play soccer better, for instance, we don't per se, we don't want you to just say, hey, I'm Will, I play professional soccer, trust everything that I say, X, Y, and Z. One of the cool things is that we can give them a model in a way of testing what I've done to become a pro. That way they can then go, awesome, if I train this way, boom, I go in the game, I can do X, Y, and Z. I can score more goals. It looks like that if I follow this, if I do this, if I explore these things, it will make me a better player. In the same sense, I find it really interesting that this model, you personally decided, hey, I have to get out of my body and I have to go test this. If you just took Bob Monroe's word for it and he said, this is the way it's working, then that's great. It wouldn't really mean much to anybody else, I don't think, because you're just taking the word of someone else and saying it. But with this idea, you were able to test what it is. And the reason I'm saying that is because I would love, if at all possible, you could give people, because there's going to be a lot of people that these ideas that you're saying right now they're definitely new to them, and a bunch of people are probably very, very intrigued right now by what you're saying and what you've done. Is there a simple way for someone who's just now hearing this to be able to go and test this themselves? Do they need to train? Hopefully the idea is that they need to train for 25 years before they can now test this theory. Is there a way for someone to start meditating in a specific way to then be able to say, cool, maybe there's something to what this guy is talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very strong in telling people that you have to be open-minded, but you have to be skeptical. Believe nothing. And that includes what I'm telling you. Believe nothing. You have to experience it. Another thing I say, if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. I'm not trying to get anybody to believe anything, but there are some ways that are easy to find out for yourself. And these things generally fall in that area of what we call paranormal. And what is paranormal? It means that we just haven't figured out how it works yet. That's what paranormal means for the most part. If you were, somebody out of the Amazon jungle that never had any context with civilization other than your own, you'd think that, a cell phone was paranormal. You'd think that a TV set was magic, you wouldn't know. Well, they're not magic. They just seem to be magic if you've never heard of it before and you've never seen it before. Anything looks like magic. So it's not, paranormal isn't something totally, beyond. It's normal when you look at it from a perspective that has knowledge. That's some of those things that I said were paradoxes that now you can explain logically. And anybody can do things like use their mind to heal, remote view, telepathically connect with people. You can learn to do those things easily. They're not hard. It doesn't take 20 years. It doesn't even take, 20 hours. You can learn to do those pretty simply. It takes probably more time than we have in this session to do that. But I have a video that's out on my YouTube channel. And if you go there and look for a video with a TMI in the title, that stands for the Monroe Institute. I've done a couple of videos there. You can find several of them. Take the latest one. And there I spend 5 days teaching people how to do these paranormal things. And I explain to them what they are, how they work, and I give them exercises, and I give them binaural beats to listen to. And then you can go over to MBT events. And when you're at MBT events, you can...
so he's pulled it up for us even. Maybe this is even the actual one.
Yeah, that's probably one of them. When you go to MBT events, you can find all those binaural beats that I was using. So you can actually get, and they're like $20. They're not much. So you can go there, and for $20, you can get the binaural beats, and you can actually do the program.
These are things that you would listen to while in a slowly. What I'm trying to even give. I have some understanding, obviously, of the process that you're doing, but even to give even the basics, I'm sure I'm certain of it that there are people here that don't even know where and what. So if you could even bring it down, like, do I sit and then listen, or
you don't have to. You don't really have to do much. Just get in a quiet place and relax. You put on a headset, and the headset plays, you can play through any MP3 player. We'll play binaural beats. And what the binaural beats do is entrain your brain waves to where your dominant brain wave is at about 4 hertz. That's called a theta hertz. That's where you are just before you fall asleep. Okay, that's the thing you go through. If you go one more down, which is delta, then you're unconscious and you're asleep. So just before you go to delta, up above that, you have alpha. Alpha is like a 10 hertz brainwave. That's, chilled out, relaxed, mellow. Then you go down to get the little lower, down to the around 4 hertz, and now you're almost gone, and then down to 2 hertz, and you're unconscious. That's just the way the brainwave is, and that's an EEG. You put all the electrodes on your head, and you look at your EEG, and that's what you'd find. So these binaural beats, what they do is they help you meditate, because if you don't use binaural beats and you're a good meditator and you put that EEG on your head with the electrodes, you'll find out that good meditators, their brainwaves, all go down. Most of their energy in their brainwaves goes down to about 4 hertz. So we're just duplicating a good meditation state. So if you've been meditating for a decade, you don't need those binaural beats. They're superfluous. If you haven't been, if you're not a good meditator or you have only been doing it for a year or two, the binaural beats will just help put you in a meditation state. Now, they're not going to force you to experience anything or do anything. They are just an aid to put you into a good meditation state and keep you there. Okay. So that's what the binaural beats are. And I'll give you some instructions of things to do while you're in that meditation state and things to practice. And you will find out that if you take it seriously and spend, just a couple of weeks, maybe let's say a month, let's say you don't have time to sit down and do it all afternoon, or all weekend. But if you just work at it for a couple of hours, maybe 2 or 3 hours a week, in 6 months, you will find success in remote viewing, in healing, in communicating with other people just mind to mind. So these things aren't that hard to do. So by all means, don't listen to what I tell you. Don't believe it. Belief is the enemy. Believe nothing. Stay skeptical, but experience. If it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So I tell everybody, go experience it. And you'll find that, yes, you can do these things. And the more you look into my model, you'll find it's not just about doing things that are paranormal or doing physics. It's about life. It's about how to live your life, how to find happiness, how to find, confidence, security, and it'll make you a better soccer player. It'll make you a better whatever it is you do. It'll make you a better athlete. As all athletes know, you don't get good at anything athletic with the intellect. The intellect is there to kind of guide you into certain things. Well, try this kind of routine, but to get good at it, you have to work out of the intuitive side of yourself, right? You have to just do it. You can't think about it. You can't say, well, should I kick the ball now or should I wait a little bit? By then the moment's gone, right? You just do it because it feels right at the time. You do it because your instincts tell you that's what you do.
Flow.
Yeah.
Right. That flow.
You get in the flow. Well, all athletes have learned to get in that flow as they do their athletics. Well, all of these paranormal things are nothing more than getting in the flow. It's getting into that intuitive space. So athletes actually have some advantages in that they already have developed that intuitive side to get in the flow, let the intellect, go off to the side. I mean, the intellect's still there, but it's not the one that's actually making the moves. It's you get in the flow and you just do it because that's the right thing to do. So that's kind of an advantage to athletes.
So I would ask then, this is on the same topic, because I find it fascinating, obviously, the practical nature with which you used that. And obviously when you were looking at meditation and thinking, well, that's great. If I don't have to sleep as much, then I can do this. And you found out, obviously, that it was helping you solve problems. I've definitely, and it's natural. And my dad, who doesn't meditate truly often or anything like that, but we both, obviously, he also played professional football. You would have dreams in football. I've definitely had some form of a kind of precognitive, dream. I've always, you tend to dismiss them based on, our societal nature towards dreams. And I'm currently reading Man and His Symbols by Jung. And obviously, the Jungian thought has a really interesting way of looking at dreams, meaning that AKA they're important. They're trying to tell you something. This is trying to give you some information about what you can do in your life. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really cool, the practical nature of trying to learn something like this, because yes, it can make you a better soccer player. It can make your memory more sharp. It can make you deal with all sorts of emotions and different things. And you touched on telepathy, and I'm actually going to have Dr. Camille Baker on this upcoming Thursday, and she did some studies into telepathy around the same time that you were actually putting out My Big Toe, your book. And so I'm really curious on what her results are. But do you find anything? I don't want to say dangerous, or maybe intriguing is the right word, about Elon Musk. Have you heard of the Neuralink?
Yeah. I haven't seen the video yet, but I've heard of it. Yeah, I know. A little thing they drill down in brain, implant something in the brain that then will send little signals and little impulses to the brain. Yeah.
Yes. Well, so on one note, it's obviously brilliant, because I think what they'll be able to do for people with epilepsy is stop seizures almost entirely, which I think is brilliant. Now, the other aspect of it is obviously it's going to be some sort of brain-to-brain interface, which is using the technology in order to, connect with someone or some machine or something. Do you see any sort of issues with what it is that you've learned and seen, and actually being able to do these things and train and do these things?
Well, yes. The consciousness, as I said, is non-physical. Okay, this is a physical device. What the physical device does is it modifies the avatar. Now, that avatar's biology sets constraints on what the consciousness can do with that avatar. Okay, so let's say you get hit in the head with an iron pipe and you have brain damage. It hasn't hurt the consciousness any, but it has limited what the conscious can do with that avatar. It damages the avatar, so it damages the potential of that avatar of what it can do. Now, putting this thing in your head like Elon Musk does, it's going to start changing those limitations. Okay. Now, a limitation can be something that prevents you from doing things. It also can be something that makes it easier for you to do things. Okay. So it can make some things easier, make some things more difficult. It's just limitations. So no device is really going to do anything to consciousness. All it's going to do is modify the limitations that consciousness, what that conscious can do with that avatar. Now, if you have a biology that's dysfunctional, okay, now that biology follows a rule set. In a virtual reality, our biology is defined by a rule set. And in these rule sets, there's lots of things that can go wrong. There's probability, many ways that things can be put together. Okay. So if you happen to have brain chemistry that's dysfunctional, and let's say you have epileptic seizures because potentials build up in a particular part of the brain and they just need to be relaxed, then yes, putting a wire down there or putting a signal down there may be able to, to help fix that. So yes, it has some potential. But as far as creating link to link where people can have conversations or make meaningful connections to each other, I suspect it's not going to do much. I think a lot of that is hypothetical, that they're thinking maybe they can do that because they don't really understand the nature of consciousness, but it's not going to work out as well as they think. Yes, it'll be able to do some things, and it'll maybe create some barriers and maybe take away some barriers, but it's not going to affect consciousness any. You see, their viewpoint is that consciousness is a product of the brain. Consciousness is a creation of the brain. Therefore, anything they do to the brain can affect consciousness, because consciousness is the product of the brain. So you change the brain, you change consciousness. It doesn't work that way. Consciousness is fundamental. The brain is a virtual brain in a virtual reality. It only represents the constraints of the rule set. So it's because they lack that understanding that they're thinking they're going to do things in consciousness, but it isn't really going to work that way. Well, all they can do is create barriers that weren't there before, which might limit potentials from growing to the point that you have epileptic seizure. So that's a good thing. Or they may remove some barriers that would allow consciousness maybe to do some things that it otherwise wasn't able to do. Just like if you make somebody who has an IQ of 100 have an IQ of 150, you've removed some barriers. Now they can do things that they couldn't do before. So it may change some things in the brain. We don't know what yet. That's still gone. But their basic understanding of body brain is backward. So they're working under a false assumption.
So what? Yeah, I'm definitely of the nature of, clearly I don't know enough to know what's going on. And what our producer here was pulling up is, I think they believe they've been actually testing the Neuralink on pigs so far. I'm not necessarily sure what has happened, but I kind of want to get into, okay, so he's just pulling this up. Yeah. So I guess apparently, obviously, they've been able to read the brain activity of pigs. I don't know what necessarily does that mean that a pig is going to be able to control something above its level of general consciousness?
If you put electrodes on a human skull, then you're going to get this EEG. That's what I was talking about. The 4 hertz, the alpha, the beta, all that stuff. You're going to get brainwave activity. And if you put those sensors over your heart or over your liver or on your foot, you're going to get some electromagnetic activity. The nervous system is basically an electromagnetic thing. Electrical impulses run up and down the nerve. So you're going to get these signals. Sure. You're going to get them in a pig or a chimpanzee or a rat or anything else. And they're looking at these signals. And so, of course, you're going to say, oh, here's the electromagnetic activity on a pig. Okay. Right. So, now that doesn't necessarily mean that a human is going to, commune with the pig. Now, humans can interact with other consciousness. You can tap into the consciousness of your dog or your cat or your pig or your horse or, the birds that fly around. But their consciousness isn't like our consciousness. So you have to interact with them mostly in a feeling space, because they operate mostly within a kind of an instinctual feeling space. So you have to operate in that space. So you're not going to sit down and say, "Oh, hi, pig. What did you have for breakfast this morning?" And that's not going to work like that.
Right. And I think that's what people have probably. I mean, because that would be very cool if I could have the same level of conversation that we're having right now with a lion, with a pig, with anything like that. And I understand that totally. But what I think is also cool about everything that you've discovered, and I think that is something that everyone is very interested in, is your ability now that we've, based on the model that you've presented, we realize that we're avatars, or essentially in this world, being controlled by consciousness, let's say, outside of this current, physical reality. What about the effect that I can have on my reality by changing the way that I think? I mean, clearly The Secret and a lot of different types of things have gone on to try and explain what can be done by changing your mindset and doing certain things. Do you have a understanding of what can be done? Or
Absolutely. That's one of the things that this model of mine has explained, is, how do things like The Secret work? What's the mechanism behind them? And in order to run this virtual reality, one of the things a computer has to have is a probable future database, understand what's likely to happen next. Now, we have free will, so it's not determinism. It's not what will happen next, but it's what's likely to happen next. We get to make free will choices, and that can change everything in the future because we make an unexpected choice. Okay, so it needs this so that it can be ready to dish up the next bunch of video, the next bunch of avatars and so on. It has to have some sense of what's going to happen next. And it's a probabilistic reality, so it has to have the probability distributions. It has to work. It has some work to do in the background to create the virtual reality. So it has this probable future database. And let me back up and say another thing. There's a point for this. There's a point for this virtual reality. It didn't just exist for no reason. It's there for a reason. And that reason is that we, consciousness, playing avatars, get to make choices. And by the quality of the choices we make, we can evolve or de-evolve our consciousness. So consciousness quality, conscious evolution is what we're here for. And you evolve your quality of consciousness by being cooperative, by being caring, by having empathy, by it not just being all about me, what's good for me and what can I get out of it, but being part of something larger. That's that's how you get this quality of consciousness. If you're very self-centered, it's all about you, and you're just a user of people, then that's de-evolving the quality of your consciousness. That's the fear. That's the ugliness part. So we're here for a purpose, and this virtual reality, like any virtual reality, well, I shouldn't say like any, but like a flight trainer. It's a trainer for us to lower our entropy or raise the quality of our consciousness, to evolve our consciousness. So that's the point of it. And any good school needs feedback. If you're in school and nobody ever tells you how you're doing, well, it's hard to learn. Did I get those answers right on a test or not? Well, you need the teacher to tell you got these wrong, and here's why you got these wrong, and then you can learn something. Well, in this consciousness school, this virtual reality, I'll call it, it's a consciousness quality trainer, if you will, that we're in. Then the feedback is that our intent, that's our intent. Now, it's not just our wish, but that's at a being level intent, what the core of us really wants, what it intends. It changes the probability in this future probability system. It changes the probability of those things that'll happen. So future intent modifies future probability. So that's been realized for a long time. I mean, go back in the middle 1950s, and I think a guy was Norman Vincent Peale wrote a book called The Power of Positive Thinking. It's like 55 or something, so it's not like this brand new idea. It's been around a long, long time. And people know that if they put a mental energy, but it can't be just a casual wish. It needs to be some mental energy out of themselves for a particular thing to happen. Like, we don't want it to rain next Saturday because we're having a picnic. So if you really put some mental energy into that, you can increase the probability that it won't rain. Or if you're a farmer and you really need that rain and you put some energy into it needs to rain, then you can increase the probability that it rains. So the fact that your intent modifies future probability. And it's a multiplayer game. So you got people wanting it to rain, people not wanting it to rain, and you sum all that up and it either does or it doesn't based on that. So this intent is additive. So if you and 100 other people want the sun to shine on Saturday, then that's going to be more powerful than if it's just you. All of those add, and now you've got about 100 times as much probability change. You see?
Yeah.
So that's just the way the reality works. And that's why we have a thing called the placebo effect. The placebo effect is a piece of science. Matter of fact, a drug company can't sell drugs unless they can beat the placebo effect. Okay. And the placebo effect is that if you tell people that this pill you're giving them is a wonderful new, thing that's going to cure what they have, it does make them get better. Not just makes them think they're better, but it really does. The people taking the placebo often get better, get healthier because of the placebo. And they first found this out in I think it was World War I, not World War II. They found it out they ran out of any kind of painkiller. Okay, they were giving painkillers to these soldiers that were beat up, but they didn't have any more. They're in tents out in little makeshift, hospitals out in the field someplace. They run out of morphine. So they just told these soldiers, I'm going to give you a shot of morphine. Wow. And they gave them some salt water or something. And a lot of them, that helped their pain. And that was like, geez, what's going on here? The salt water is acting like morphine, not all the time, not to everybody, but to a significant number. And that was the beginning of the placebo effect, that what your mind believes can modify what you experience. It can change reality. So that's how the secret works. You put your mind on things. But what the secret doesn't necessarily tell you, that because this is a system based on growing up, based on increasing the quality of your consciousness, if what you want with your intention is to just build up your ego or get something or or make somebody else stumble and fall. Oh, I really want this guy to go away because I want his job, and I want the boss to hire me because, I'd like that, even though I'm not really as qualified as anybody else, So if you do these things that are for these negative reasons, it's all about self-centered and what about me, running over other people, then it's not going to work. The system doesn't like to work against itself. So those sorts of things are going to be much harder to do. You're going to have to bring a whole lot of power to the table if you're going to force it to do things that are against its self-interest. And it here now is just the consciousness system, the evolutionary process of the consciousness system. So that's something the secret doesn't tell you. It works better if it's a positive thing, and it works better if it's from the heart, not just out of the intellect. The intellect makes wishes.
Okay, so then to get it to understand, that's almost working as a fail-safe. So in the true understanding of the word, consciousness is trying to lower entropy, to get people to truly have a sense of oneness towards love. And these are a lot of things that we hear and have heard over, I mean, God knows how many generations and how many different religions have come to these sort of understandings, that's kind of, because, when one wants to talk about why are humans here? Why am I even here in this first place at all? What are we also all as a community, as a collective, as a society? What are we doing here? Is it to get more money so we can buy more things? Is it, to come together, to find ways to solve issues, et cetera? So it does make sense to me to have, if it is a system that's trying to solve a problem and wants people to evolve, then it's rather complex. But I would definitely want to ask, then people, I'm sure, are curious, if I do have an effect on my own world, and if everyone in the room, if we had 100 people are all hoping for one thing to happen, wouldn't it make sense, though, too, that there would be, just like in sports and just like in the field of science or anything intellectual, there are some people with some natural gifts towards that or not. Is there a way for someone who, say, isn't Michael Jordan right now, to train very, very hard at this? What makes it easier? Or I guess my question is, what could one person do to amplify their ability to affect the world around them? Is that meditation? Is that focusing only on one thing? Is it learning how to do some sort of single pointed focused meditation? Or how would one do that? Because it would be helpful, I imagine.
Yeah, it's a confluence of several things. Let's just start with the thing that has the least power. The least power is just an intellectual wish. Oh, I wish it wouldn't rain on Saturday. All right, does very little. Okay, that's not much. You've got an intellectual thought and you put it out there, and all right, maybe it does just a little bit of something, but not much. Pretty weak player. Okay, if you can take that thought, that idea about when you don't want it to rain, let's say, or if you do want it to rain, and you can take that out of the intellect and put it into an intuitive space. Now, a lot of people think, what's that mean? How do you take a thought, and put it in intuitive space? But you think all the time in intuitive space. That's what you're doing out on that field when you're playing soccer. You're thinking in an intuitive space, not an intellectual space. Intellect is too slow. Intellect is, if you got to think about the problem, well, the time you set up the problem to think about it, the situation's changed. You don't have time to think. The intellect doesn't play there because it's too slow. You need to be able to just do it because somehow it's the right thing to do. And somehow that there's somebody over there that's going to be just in the right spot when you kick that ball over there. And it's not because you stopped, looked around and said, oh, I see, Joe's over there running and he's going to be there in 10 seconds. I'll get the ball to him. It's not like that. You get your data out of microsecond things that you can kind of feel where people are on the field, and you get a glance, and that's all you need. It's all the data you need. It's just a speck out there in your peripheral vision because you've trained for that, you see. So yes, you can train yourself for this, and some people are very strong in their ability to modify future probability, and most are very weak. But anybody can learn to be strong. Just like anybody can learn probably to be a good soccer player if they're not too young or not too old, and if they work hard enough at it, right? I mean, you can take people And if they're going to work on it, that may mean lose weight. It may mean gain muscle. It may mean get coordination. But if you're going to really work at it, well, okay, let's say you work at it for 2 or 3 years. Well, you ought to be maybe not a great player, but you ought to be a pretty good player.
Much better.
Yeah. You'd be a much better player if you work at it. Well, this is the same way. So what's important is that you always have to work from an intuitive space, not an intellectual space. It has to come, another way of saying that, it comes from the heart. Now, we do all kinds of things in intuitive space. Let's say things that everybody does now. A lot of people now touch type, right? It's called keyboarding now, not typing. So you put your hands out there and you do like this and you type. If you use your intellect and say, now, where's that T? Oh, yeah, this finger up there. Well, if you have to do it by thinking about it, you're going to be less than 10 words a minute. You're going to be like 4 or 5 words a minute. That's your max. Too slow. But if you get that into an intuitive space where you see the letter T and your finger just does that, just goes out and smacks that T on a thing because you're typing this thing that you're reading. So that's what I mean, get an intuitive space. Everything that people do really, really well, they do it from an intuitive space, whether it's playing soccer, whether it's typing, whether it's throwing a javelin, whether it's anything. You do it from the intuitive space, it's better. Even if it's making love. If you do it from the intuitive space, you're doing it better. If you have to think about it, you're clumsy, you're slow. It's not something you can have to think about. So this is the same way. So it's not an intellectual thing. So first thing you have to learn is to get out of your intellect and exist in your mind without your intellect. That's your mental intuitive space. And that's about the hardest thing that there is to learn. Just that. Well, how hard is it to learn to touch type? Well, you're not going to learn it in a day. You're going to learn it over months. And you're going to have to practice every day for months before you get to the point where your fingers know what they're doing on their own. Well, this is the same way. You can learn it in months if you practice. So intuitive space is one big one. Then you have to be focused. So if you want a specific thing to happen, like not to rain, you have to have all of your mental energy focused on that thing. Now, most people's mental energy is scattered all the time. And when people first learn to meditate, they find that out. The thoughts are just zinging through their head all the time. They can focus on something for about 3 seconds and then bling, in comes a thought. And then they try to focus on, get all those thoughts out of their head and then come more thoughts. And that's how you practice focus is through meditation. Meditation will teach you to quiet your mind and empty it of everything. Just be there with nothing in your mind. That will give your mind some discipline. Without the discipline, your mind is like a room full of 3-year-olds. Everybody's just running every which way, and there's no discipline at all. Well, that's the way most people's thinking is. So, second thing is one, you get intuitive space. Second, you need discipline. Your mind needs to be disciplined so it can focus with all your energy on one thing. Okay, the next thing then you need to do is you have to have some oomph in it, some caring, some connection. It has to be something that means something to you. It can't just be a thing you're doing, just for the hell of it. It needs to have, you really don't want any rain on that Saturday because you and your whole extended family are all going to meet there. And it's really important. And you don't have any other place that you can meet. And it has to have something that really you want to happen. If you're healing, you have to really care about that person that you're healing. They're not just, some subject I'm playing with, but you have to really care about them, you see? So it has to have, that's the kind of gets the power from that. So
that emotion, right?
It has to have some emotion, some connection, some genuineness that, of what you're doing. It can't be, you can't just be playing. If you're just playing with it, then nothing too much will happen. So you get all these things together, a mind that's disciplined, okay? The fact that you can think and function in intuitive space, not in intellectual space. That's the hardest one for people in our culture because we function out of intellectual space, except when we train ourselves not to do it, which is what you do when you play soccer or when you touch type or when you do anything else that you're particularly good at. You know, I had a guy in my house who was a painter, and man, he took that brush, he'd stick it in the paint, he'd tap it a couple of times, and you know, and he was painting woodwork in windows. You know, there were glass with little pieces of wood in them, and that guy never used tape. He didn't put tape on.
Wow.
And he never got a molecule of paint on the glass, and he never let a molecule of wood go without paint on it. He was just good. But if you watched him, he went in the zone. He wasn't there anymore. He was in intuitive space. And what he did, he could put his hand up and draw a perfectly straight line. No wiggles, nothing, just perfectly straight line. But he couldn't do that if he was thinking about it. If you're thinking about it, well, make sure I don't want to miss that point. You know, and if you're thinking about it, man, you're going to slop paint everywhere.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you do it out of an intuitive space, you'll do it better. You know, if it requires coordination, if it requires precision, you're going to do it better. Well, this requires precision. You have to think on a particular thing, and you have to get in that intuitive space. So that's, you know, the guy who was the head painter there, he says, yeah, he just gets in a zone and goes, and he can paint more windows in an hour than anybody else can all day long, you know, because he just, you know, he just paints them like that. Yeah, no problem. So that's the key. You have to get in that intuitive space, not an intellectual space. You have to give up judging. You have to give up analyzing. You just have to do it. In other words, you have to be it. You have to be it. So if you can get in that space and you get oomph from caring, from really wanting to do this, it makes a difference to you. And if you can get rid of all the noise in your mind to where you can focus everything on just exactly what you're doing. And you know, when you're playing soccer, when you're out there on that field, you know there are fans out in the stands. You know there are people on the sidelines. You know there's all this stuff going on. But when you're in the moment, all of that's gone. It just disappears. It's not totally there. It doesn't exist in your reality. You see, that's focus. That's what we're talking about. Nothing else is in your reality. So when you learn to meditate, that's what you're doing. You're putting your mind in that focus where there's nothing else going on in your reality except, let's say, healing, or except remote viewing, or except what you're doing in these things. So how long did it take you before you were good at that? Probably a decade. You probably played soccer when you were real little, and then when you were older, and then when you were older, and then when you're older. And all of that time put together makes you to where you are a good player, because you get into the zone. And when you're in the zone, you're just fluid. You move with the flow. You know what to do. Everything just works out right. And that makes you a really great player. And it's true of any sport, and actually not just sports, anything. Even if you're a painter, that's true. If you're one of those guys that drives those race cars at 200 mile an hour around corners, you know, it's the same thing. Those guys get in a zone, and when they pull into the pit, they don't want anybody talking to them and chatting to them about what they're going to do afterwards or anything else. They have to keep their mind in the zone, because if they get out there and try to work from their intellect, they're going to die. You know, they're going to crash. They have to stay in that. So whatever it is you're doing, if it's something that requires focus, you learn to get out of your intellect. Doing the paranormal things are the same way. And that's the hard thing for people to do that. It's easier maybe if you're actually playing soccer than it is if you're just sitting in a chair and have to get into that space. Get out of your intellect. It's a little harder thing to do, because it's not a doing thing, it's a being thing. But anybody can do it. Anybody can learn these things. It's not special few. Only special few probably work at it enough to get really good at it. But that's true of soccer players too, right? I mean, how many soccer players are really, really good, and how many are so-so, okay, and how many are, whatever. I mean, it's the same way, whether you're playing the piano or playing soccer or anything else. There are a few that float up to be good enough to say, if they're sports, get in the Olympics, or go pro, but that's just the people who are best at it.
I think that's really Sorry. Yeah, no, I was just going to add that I think it's very important for people to be hearing also that, because I think that sort of mentality, and there are people with kind of a fixed mindset, I guess it would be the way, where they just kind of think if this is the way things are, that's how they should be. Or I can't play the piano well because I was born like this. I can't play soccer well because I'm uncoordinated. I can't do X, Y, and Z because that's just not how, I was born, or how it was to be. And it's a wildly, and it's something that we are consistently telling guys and girls out there that's how you get better. This is it. It doesn't really matter. Your starting point is not truly important as far as how much you can grow if you put in the work. And I just wanted to recount, which is kind of interesting. One of the best goals that I've ever scored, so just a few years ago. And what happened, it was almost as if time slowed down, and it basically explains kind of what you're saying. So I had when we actually put this up, we can go ahead and put that actual goal up there, but the ball was played to me over 60 yards, and I was near the box getting ready there were many defenders around me, and I just thought to myself, kind of a fear-based thought, it's okay if you just kind of swing at it, and if I just use my head this is what I was thinking as the ball was coming into me. Of course, I didn't realize how strange it was for me to be having so many thoughts in such a small amount of time that I didn't realize that time had slowed down. And so while the ball was flying towards me, I thought, well, if you just hit it, no one's going to be mad with you, Will. There's 3 defenders. But for some strange reason, during that time, all I did was, so there it is. So you have a chance to see it. As it was coming into me, I decided, well, you know what? I don't want to head it. What I want to do is just go ahead and I'm going to decide to chest it, put it on my chest. And so as I thought right there, as its paws right there, I was thinking, let me just put it on my chest. And when I did this right there, I did not tell my foot to kick up. Some other part of me decided to kick the ball up and over the defender. I did not tell him. I've told my dad the story many, many times. He constantly tells me, well, of course you did. You told yourself to do it. And nothing like that has ever happened to me ever before. I mean, I've done definitely things on the field that I've not been able to explain, but I've never had the experience of thinking, you know what? I'm just going to not choose to do the fear thing. And then as it just kind of flowed, all of the rest of it, it was an incredibly low probability of this thing to happen. But the only reason it happened was because once I decided to go with my gut, my intuition, the rest just kind of, it just kind of manifested. Yeah. It was one of the strangest things ever.
That's exactly the way it works. You can do all kinds of amazing things when you just get out of the way and let them happen. And, meditation is the same way, and doing paranormal is the same way. I tell people when they come into my course, I teach a course, teach people how to do these things, because I tell them, if it's not your experience, it's not your truth. So after I tell them that, they say, well, then help me get the experience. So I do. I have these courses where I help people get these experiences. And in any case, often I'll have beginners, and they say, well, I'm just a beginner. I'm not going to be good at that. And I'll say, well, actually, being a beginner is an advantage because you don't have a lot of beliefs yet. You're just a beginner. So just do it, just see what happens. Have a scientist attitude. Well, I'm just going to go, I'm just going to see what happens. And those beginners will often do amazingly well. They'll do really, really well until they realize they're doing well. And as soon as they see themselves doing well, their intellect will jump up and go, gosh, I'm good at this. I should really try rather than just sit here and just, be casual with it. I need to try harder, and then I'd be super good at it. And as soon as they try, it's gone. No more. They don't have it anymore. After that, they get everything wrong. You see, when they were relaxed and just let go, then it was easy. As soon as they try to do it, and if you had been thinking, I'm going to get in a position, I'm going to get my foot up there, and I'm going, falling on your ass, and and totally. Somebody would have stepped on your face. It just wouldn't have worked out at all. But the fact that it just happened because you let your body do what it knows how to do. It knows how to interact with that ball and get it to go where you want it to go, and let it do it. That's the thing. And if your mind jumps in with a question, I shouldn't do that. The playbook would say, use your head, but the playbook really talks about averages or some cases, in that case, at least the way I saw it, there was a guy standing in front of you. To get your head in the right spot would have been hard. You would have needed to get through that guy. So
Totally.
it wasn't going to work out that way, so then you just let your body do with it whatever it does. And that's because you were in the zone, not trying to think about what to do. And because you've played thousands of hours of soccer, so your instincts, your intuition is really good in soccer. Your intuition in, I don't know, something else, ice skating, may not be as good. You may not be as good a hockey player because you don't have, decades worth of experience building up your intuitive strength in ice skating. So you're not going to necessarily be that good. But yes, that's how things work. Exactly.
Right. So I would say, and just a little bit more time here before we let you go.
This is being recorded, right? If it's recorded, we can go as long as you want to.
Okay. Oh, okay. Cool. I've got a couple at least more questions.
You can break it up into multiple.
Sure.
You can break it up into multiple chunks when you send it out.
Okay. Well, then, I was actually gonna touch on. Oh gosh, look at me now. I even have my notes here all set up. Okay, I was going to get into. So then, what does that mean then now for what you're trying to? I wouldn't say prove, but what you're trying to do at 𝗪𝗛𝗟𝗟. Like, what is it now what drives you in what you're trying to do? I mean, you've gone a long way in deciding to take up something as big and ambitious as my big toe, which is obviously quite ambitious in order to present that as a model for reality and what it means for people. So now, I guess my real question is, what is driving you to do what you're doing now, and what is your hope, and why do you feel as if what we're talking about here today, it is in one sense becoming a bit more mainstream to at least have these discussions on these things, but in another sense, it doesn't feel like that is it's not the predominant thought. I think people have a hint that maybe something else is going on, but in order probably to get the full benefits of this, you kind of need to like we've been talking, kind of let yourself go and say, hey, let me just let intuition drive this. And maybe there's something to the fact. And I think it's really great just because what it does in at least having this is give you the ability to feel as if you have some control over your life, some that you are actually, at least in some sense, not saying that there isn't a randomness to reality, but that I'm the king of the kingdom, and that kingdom is me, let's say. And if I want to make a change for whether that's healing, whether that's what I'd want to put out, my ability to affect the world is coming from my focused intent, my clarity of mind, and doing these things, I can then affect the world around me. And I think that works for some people in a practical sense. I mean, there's a psychologist who's very famous named Jordan Peterson, who's constantly telling people when they have issues to simply go clean your room as a start, because, if you can just start there, that's one perfect thing to do. If you can try and if you can sit down for 5 minutes and breathe, then that can get you a few minutes of space. And I think that's where in this community sense, they need to kind of look at for the rest of the world. Giving them practical solutions on how to deal with life is one way to get a whole lot of people interested in trying to get their brains to be more, less scattered. I mean, that is the thing. We've all experienced that. But I would just, to get my question even more clear, what is driving what you're doing now? Is it your hope that the greater society takes this on? Is that really what you're pushing for? Is it the scientific community, or what are you trying to do with all the work you're doing now?
All of the above. And a few other things besides. It's got a lot of different facets. This is the toe, of course, is a theory of everything. I don't know if we pointed that out or not, but that's the idea.
Okay.
And then the theory of everything, that was a phrase, I think, created by Einstein, and he was working through the 50s and 60s. He was working on a theory of everything. Because once quantum physics was created, like in the early 1900s, and then he created relativity, and they both actually happened around the same time, those two sciences kind of clashed with each other philosophically. Each one of them had an assumption that the other one denied. Each one of them needed an assumption for their thing to work that the other one denied even existed. So they knew that there was something else bigger, more fundamental above their relativity and quantum mechanics, that there was something else from which both of those could be derived. And this was called the theory of everything. And Einstein spent the last 20 years of his life trying to discover this theory of everything, the thing that was above those two, the more general idea of explanation. And of course, he failed. He wasn't able to do that, and nobody has been able to do that until now. I've done that. That's why I call this a toe. And the thing that you have to start with that's above those two is an understanding of consciousness. And if you understand consciousness, then you can derive both of those. Both quantum mechanics and relativity fall out of this understanding of the nature of reality, which is an understanding of consciousness. So anyway, so we had that big idea there, okay, with the my big toe. Now let's see, where was I going with that?
Possibly on your way to describe what it is that you're doing at COSAC.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, I was explaining really all the various places where this hits. So, okay, it works with science. So science is one of the things. Physics is one of the things. Okay, physics is important. And I'll come back later to tell you why the physics is so important. It's important beyond just the science of physics. It's got another importance. But besides the science part of it, because a lot of people go, yeah, physics, okay, who cares? Quantum physics, relativity, it's not really my thing. Why should I care about that? Well, that's an honest point. But the other thing that it does that's very important to it is that if your life, it tells you why you're here, what your point is, what your purpose is. You're here to evolve the quality of your consciousness. You've been put in this virtual reality entropy reduction trainer, and entropy reduction is another. It's kind of a physics term for making having good quality consciousness. So it's an entropy reduction or conscious quality trainer, and that's what we're here for, to make better choices. And there's feedback in this trainer, like we said before. What your intention is, that tends to move probability toward that intention. And so the world we see outside of us today, if you just look out and say, well, what's this world like today? Oh, it's pretty ugly out there in many ways. It's an ugly place. It's a dangerous place. And if you look out there and you say, well, why is it like that? That's pretty awful. Well, that's the way we are. That's the way we, the people, are. We human beings, that's our feedback. Our intentions create future probabilities. That thing you see out there on the news and when you go out of your house, that's what we've created. That is how ungrown we are. That's how far we have to go. We are not, we're like in an elementary school or maybe even preschool as far as the growing of our quality of consciousness goes. We're just beginning. So if you live your life and you find that there's a lot of negativity in your life. Now, negativity, I would say, is things, let's say, anger, upset, annoyed, feeling bad, not appreciated, all of these things, even just stress. If your world is full of stress and anger and annoyance, that means that you have a lot of growing to do. If you can get rid, that's all fear-based. If you can get rid of that fear and instead, get rid of that fear, which gets rid of that ego, which gets rid of those beliefs. It's the ego, the beliefs, the fear. The fear creates the ego and beliefs. You can get rid of that junk. What you will find is that your life becomes one of joy. Your life becomes positive. That doesn't mean your life necessarily becomes easy. It doesn't mean that, everything you ever thought of, falls in your lap. It just means you become happy. Your life becomes full of joy, whatever that situation is. You accept things as they are. You accept people as they are. You don't let people make you upset. You accept them. that is the way they are. Now, that a lot of that needs to be changed. Those people need to grow up, but that's not something that is your mission. Okay. Now, your mission may be to help those people find an environment in which they can grow themselves up, because you can't grow somebody else up. You can only grow yourself up. Everybody has to grow up from the inside out, not from the outside in. And when you find this idea, this philosophy, when you understand the nature of reality and why you're here, suddenly your life goes from one of struggle, constant struggle, to one of constant joy and constant happiness and constant feeling good about yourself and about life in general, even though the world is still an ugly place. You see, just because the world's an ugly place, you don't have to be dragged down by it. You don't have to be miserable. You don't have to be upset and angry. You see, yes, you should be helping people maybe grow up by helping them see bigger pictures and things, but you can't force anything on anybody. All you can do is give them an environment where they can more easily change themselves.
Right.
Okay. And then you realize that, okay, the world out there is like it is because like we are. So it's not really because of the bad politicians and the bad, economy and the bad, we have all these things. Oh, if we could just get rid of that politician, everything would be great. If we could just get rid of this economic system, everything would be great. That bad politician and this lousy economic system are a reflection of us, of how we are. It's who we are.
As a whole.
That's, if we change who we are, if we grow up, that politics will clean itself up. That economic system will clean itself up. It'll all, those bad politics and bad economics are a symptom of a low quality of consciousness. You see, they're not the cause, they're the symptom. The cause is a low quality of consciousness. So it's all about, it's about physics and it's about, that sort of thing, but it's also just about life. It's about finding happiness, finding quality, growing yourself up, understanding what you need to do to grow yourself up. How do you approach getting rid of fears? How do you recognize that you're living your life based on fear, based on ego, and based on beliefs? You talked a little bit before. People think they couldn't be a good soccer player. They couldn't be a good piano player. They couldn't do this. They couldn't do that. They're not smart enough to do these other things. They're not, athletic enough to do these other things. All that's nonsense. Those are all beliefs. And those beliefs are what I call belief traps. You get trapped in those beliefs and then you make the belief come true because you believe it. So the thing is that, you need to get rid of beliefs, all your beliefs. You need to be skeptical about everything, and anything that you want to do, you probably can do and can do it well if you just try and apply yourself and, have the right attitudes toward it. So my model, it's about physics. It's about life. It's about individual people. It's about relationship. How do you get along with people? How do you get along, you and your teammates, you and your spouse, you and your children, you and your boss. It's all these relationships. And you find out that if you understand this model, all those relationships will start getting better, because instead of wanting or needing those people to be the way you need them to be, you can accept those people for who they are. And once you deal with them as who they are, that gives them the possibility to be the way you need them to be. Before, as long as you were demanding, well, then they can't go there. Nobody likes to be pushed. And when somebody's pushing you, you tend to push back. So anyway, relationships get better. So it's about life. It's about people. And the reason physics is so important is that for the first time in the history of the human race, we have a chance to take some big steps, some leaps even, in the quality of consciousness. So now think of human beings have been walking around for about 200,000 years. Homo sapiens.
Yeah.
They've been around for about 200,000 years. And during that time, the evolution of consciousness in this virtual trainer we're in has been slow, really, really slow, because it only works by changing yourself, by getting rid of your fear. That's how it works. So it's a slow thing for people to do. They have to be different, not just act different, but be different. So it's kind of been this, warlord mentality that we've been through. That's kind of our basic social organization has been warlord mentality. And we've had that mentality for most of for that 200,000 years. It's only been in the last 300 years or so, 300 or 400 years, that we begin to break out of that. Break out of that mentality.
Sure.
Now, as a human race, we've had little bits and pieces. They had a little republic in Rome and in Greece for a little while before that went bad and went back to, dictatorship and warlord mentality. But there's been little things that blossomed here and there, and some in the East. We had some nice little, things that happened in China and Japan and other places in the East that were more intelligent than warlord, but again, only for a while. Then they get run over by the warlords. So we're just getting past that now. Okay, now evolution is one of those things that has to go at its own pace, and it's been terribly slow, but it's been getting quicker. We've had more evolution in the last, say, 200 years than we had in the almost 200,000 before it. Okay, and we've had more evolution in the last, 100 years than we had in the last, than the two or 300 or 2 or 3 centuries before that. So we're getting to where we're moving faster. We're not just doing the same things. The more you learn, the easier it is to learn more. And now we're at a point where finally, for the first time ever in the last 30 years, I'd say it's the first time ever since the internet, because the internet is one of the main components. We've had everything together to take a big leap forward, not just take these tiny little steps. It takes us a century just to grow a little bit, but in decades, we might grow a whole lot. And here's how I see that happening. So we live in very interesting times, but times that have a lot of promise and a lot of potential at the same time. Well, physics has been coming around very slowly, and it's been growing actually in the last decade pretty quickly, this idea that we're living in a virtual reality. Now, they say we're living in a information-based reality, but as I say, those are all the same things. Where's the information come from? Well, the information is computed or can be computed. Let's put it that way.
Right.
And that's the same as a simulation. You hear simulation theory, and that's taken seriously by physics now. That's taken very seriously in physics. So you have any number of physics papers in physics journals that have the word simulation theory, in them. It's a real thing. So it's growing. When I first published my big toe, there was maybe 2 or 3 people I knew of that thought virtual reality was a sane idea. Everybody else thought it was crazy. Well, 10 years, 15 years later, that's not the case. Now it's something that, you hear about, books are written about, so it's coming up. Well, in physics, there's about 30% of physicists now agree that this is an information-based reality, and they're mostly the younger guys. It's the old group that are still clinging on to Newtonian ideas of the great, clockwork, universe, materialism, determinism. So what has stopped physics from going much further is that they don't know what to do with it. Okay, it's a virtual reality. Okay, it's just information. Now what? What do we do with that? Where do we go with that? And they've kind of hit the wall. So with my theory and with some of their own theories and with other people from neuroscience, all sorts of people are impinging on this area now. So it's an area that's blossoming. It's not just me, but it's just an area that's blossoming. Well, when the physicists get to the place, and I think within the next decade they'll get there, that they will say, this is a virtual reality. All right, we've come to that conclusion, and this is most physicists think that this is the truth. This is a virtual reality. Well, when they say that, they won't intend for it to go much further than that because they still don't know exactly what to do with it. They're still struggling on that, but they just know that is a fact. One of those weird facts of reality that they know are true, but don't really understand very much. But when they say that this is a virtual reality, that, we human beings are avatars, this is an information-based reality, everybody else, all the philosophers, all the other deep thinkers in the world are going to say, oh, that's nice. Okay. But Where's it come from? Where is it being computed? Who wrote the code? And
Right.
it's going to just create an upheaval in people's thinkings, because suddenly the old materialism, determinism that everybody relied on is a rug everybody's been standing on for a century or more. That's going to be jerked out from under their feet. And suddenly it's all about information, not about stuff, not about matter. And that will change everything. It'll change everything in philosophy. It'll change everything in science. It'll change everything, the way we think about ourselves and who we are and that sort of thing. Okay, when they do that, if there are, I think the physicists will start that ball rolling, because I don't know if you've heard me say this in the things you've listened to, but I call the physicists the high priests of Western culture. The reason I call them the high priests of Western culture is the high priests in any culture are the people that culture looks to tell them what's fact, what's real. Well, 500 years ago, that was the high priests of religion. They were the ones that told people what was real and what wasn't. If they said this is the way it is, then that's the way it was. You believed them. The culture believed them. Okay, the clergy were very important and a very central part of the culture. Okay, well, now in modern culture, and particularly Western culture, I say, it's the scientists to have that role. When the scientists say this is the way it is and this is how it works, well, everybody believes it. That's mainstream. Yeah. So only the physicists can actually put these ideas in the mainstream. They've been in the margins outside the mainstream for thousands of years. 2,500 years ago, the Buddha said, this reality is an illusion. Well, that's like saying it's a virtual reality. This reality is an illusion. And you've had all of the philosophers up through Kant, that have been on the side of idealism. All of them have said, there's something bigger than just this physical reality. There's another component here we're missing, guys. We know it exists, but we don't know how to describe it or what it is or why it's there or anything about it. So we've had these ideas, but they've always been in the margins. Well, religions also have said there's something more than the physical, but it's all in the margins. It's all about belief. It's not science. It has some squirrely assumptions that go with it, that a lot of people have a hard time swallowing those assumptions. So now we have a logical process. Okay, my model's one of those. My model's a logical process. There's no big assumptions here that you have to jump through a hoop. Oh, yes, right. Flying pink elephants. That's what makes it work. There's nothing like that in there. It's all just basic logic. It's basic science. Sure. So when the physicists say this is a virtual reality, it will go mainstream because they're the high priests. Mm-hmm. When they say it, it's a fact. When it's a fact and not just something in the margins, then everybody else will take notice and start seeing that there's some other things then, like who's the programmer, where's the computer, how does it work? And that will be a thing. Well,
start to take off.
Yeah, at that point, we have a couple of possibilities. So let's say the physicists get there. What they have is they have this huge ball in the city right on the edge of a hill. And when they say, okay, this is a virtual reality, they're going to push that ball over the top of the hill. Okay, now what's going to happen next? Nobody's going to be able to pull that ball back. It's running. It's moving now. And a couple of things can happen. You can have new religious wars. We can have various religions saying, oh, my God's the best programmer. No, my God's a better programmer than your God, Yeah, it's a virtual reality, but my God's the one that did it. You see, you can have that going on. You can have, because what happens now, we've opened a power vacuum. We've opened, this is the way we used to see the world. Now it's not like that anymore. Whenever you do that, it's like opening a power vacuum that people are going to want to step into and say, oh, I have the answers. Follow me. Oh, it's my God, follow me. Everybody else is wrong. And we'll have a lot of that going on. People trying to step in, grab power, and run off with it. And people are very desirous of change. If you just go around the world and if you did an interview with all 7.5 billion people and you said, do you think we're doing really good or do you think we've got a lot of problems and things need to change? Almost everybody would say, no, this place is really screwed up And we need to change in some very fundamental ways. Everybody's going to say that. I don't care what their culture is or where you find them. That's obvious. So people are looking for something to take them to a better place. And as these people jumping into this power vacuum try to give them something to hang on to, well, some of them will jump on this and some of them will jump on that. And we're liable to have a lot of turmoil and a lot of then fights between each group that each one thinks they've got the answer. And that would be a terrible de-evolution. On the other hand, if enough people understand that consciousness is the computer, that this virtual reality consciousness is more fundamental than the physical, and that the purpose is to care. The purpose is to move to becoming love and getting rid of fear. It's about cooperation. It's about asking the question, what can I do rather than what can I get? How can I help rather than what can I take? That is where the solution is. And if people get that, they realize that doesn't have to come with any beliefs whatsoever. No religious things that you have to believe, no magical symbols, nothing. It's just understanding the nature of our reality. And if enough people get that, then instead of going off to turmoil and more infighting for the power, who's gonna end up with the power, we could all maybe just move over to a place where we're a little more gentler and kinder with ourselves and with other people. We see a bigger picture. Right. We realize that love is the answer, that fear is the problem, and we start working on ourselves to get rid of that fear. And if that happened, I'd say in a couple of decades of that understanding, this world could be a huge leap beyond where it is right now. Most of that nastiness you see out in the world would just disappear. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So we could really turn this corner and become a truly kinder, gentler, more caring human family if we make this change. So that's what physics has to do with everything else. It's physics that's going to bring it into the mainstream. Without physics, it's going to stay in the margins. Physics puts it into the mainstream, and physics is growing up to that responsibility now. It's getting a bigger and bigger proportion of physicists are ready to make that claim. And what I'm doing, you asked me, what I was doing with CUSAC. CUSAC is a nonprofit organization that I stood up. It's Center for the Unification of Science and Consciousness. And I have some quantum mechanics experiments, just plain quantum mechanics experiments, has nothing to do with mind space, just quantum mechanics experiments that will provide some very strong evidence that this is a virtual reality and that the computer is consciousness. So it makes some real strong evidence for those two things. Well, those two things then will help people understand, if consciousness is the computer, then what is consciousness and the consciousness system? And then it's easy to take some deductive logic and end up with love as the answer. Now, I know that seems like a big step for your listeners, but really there is a logical transition that gets you from one to the other without any assumptions. So if we have that, in other words, if even 10%, 20% of the population knows about this idea, then when the physicists finally get that ball rolling, we won't go into this big fight for the power. We'll just get it, and people will start seeing that we're creating this mess we live in. And all we need to do is grow out of it and grow up and become more caring, make this human race a family, where we care about each other. And if we get there, changes will happen dramatically. We'll see in another couple of decades of that, change will happen a lot. It may take centuries before it's all done. I mean, some stuff's deep and it'll take a long time before you pull all those roots out, no doubt, but we'll see immense changes in the first decade.
Pretty quickly. So that's because I wanted to touch on this. It's really interesting because you've said maybe 2 or 3 times at least how important it is obviously to get away from anxiety, fear, stress, a lot of the things that are going to prevent you or prohibit you from actually being able to get in touch with that part of you that's going to be better for humanity, better for you, etc. And coincidentally, that is one of the questions we receive a whole lot from people who are getting ready to play games, and that get blocks. They have blocks, and so we do a lot of work with a company called MindSport, which is basically the leading app for meditation for athletes. Mm-hmm. And they take a structured. Their founder was actually a basketball coach who, through a series of events in his life, kind of figured out that this was something that was going to benefit all the people he was coaching, and it changed him. He went on a couple silent retreats and did some stuff, and it's been very beneficial for a lot of the athletes that have used it. But I would ask you then, because it is so important to not let fear override your life, to not let anxiety or the ego-based thoughts from an ego-based, at least from an egocentric way, not to say that the ego is all bad, but just that in that sense of just thinking about me, how could, and we have our own way of dealing with this for players, but how can we get rid of fear? How do I get rid of anxiety? I think that's a massive thing that's going on, especially in today's society. And it seems to be, especially for young people, is dealing with anxiety, dealing with the social pressures, dealing with the whatever. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that? Or have you found some way for people to tackle all of the things that they fear in their lives through, your experiences in that sense?
Sure. Okay. The fears will actually boil down to just a few, even though they, fear creates more fear. The more fear you have, the easier it is to create more fear. It just builds on itself. So you start with a little tiny fear, and pretty soon you can blow that up into something that is a problem for you. And yes, athletes have blocks, writers have blocks, all sorts of people have blocks, and the blocks are all the same thing. They're blocks of fear, of course. And that fear usually starts with just some small little thing about, well, what if I screw up? Or what if I don't do this right? Or, what if I get it wrong? And that's a feeling of inadequacy. It's a feeling of not being good enough. It's a feeling of not measuring up. And our culture just produces people with that fear, period. Our culture is always, it's always very competitive. I mean, even when you're in preschool, even when you're, in elementary school, there's the kids that get it right and there's the kids who don't. Everybody sees themselves in this light of measuring themselves against others. And, there's always going to be somebody that maybe does things better than you do at some things. And you learn to doubt yourself. And when you doubt yourself, that lets that fear come in. And what makes a really good player for a long time, and not just a shot, not just a star that goes up and then comes down, is confidence. When they have that confidence that they know that if they just let themselves do what they do, it'll be all right. Whatever it is, however it comes out. Not that they'll never make a mistake. Of course they're going to make mistakes. That's not the point. If you're afraid of making mistakes, that will make you make a mistake. If you're not afraid of making mistakes, then you don't have that pressure to make the mistake. So it's a matter of dealing with these things of not being good enough. And we learn them early on. We learn them from our parents. Our parents often, we treat our children sometimes very dismissively. We don't treat them as little individual beings who, need you to come and talk to them at their level, need you to give them encouragement at their level. We're always dismissing them because they don't know much yet and they don't understand much. Just do what I tell you, that kind of a thing. Not now, we're busy. And when you keep telling kids, not now, we're busy, and do what we tell you, and you're always messing up. You only really interface with them when they've done something wrong. As long as they're being good and they're playing and everybody's happy, you got nothing to say to them. And then as soon as it gets negative, oh, well, now you're there telling them what they're doing wrong. You see, but from the child's viewpoint, the child just, it's invisible when they're doing things right, but when they're doing wrong, suddenly they get nailed for it. So people grow up feeling like they have inadequacies, that they're not good enough, that they aren't going to always succeed. And if they get really good at something, that the fact that, well, I'm good at this, I'm a star, just that thought, that's ego, makes them feel like, oh yeah, but how am I going to keep that star? Can I keep that star forever, or am I going to screw up? Well, just the fact that they became a star produces the insecurity that takes them away, takes that star away from them, you see?
Yeah.
So it's just like the people that are doing remote viewing. Oh, they're just doing it. They're being themselves. They're relaxed. Oh, they're great. And as soon as they realize, oh, I can do this, I'm good at it, they can't do anything anymore. You know?
Could you maybe just explain quickly for people who don't know what remote viewing even is?
Yes, remote viewing is that you can see in your mind things that are going on someplace else. So like right now, if I wanted to know what was going on in some other part of the world, I could go to that part of the world in my mind and view it and interact with it. And I could come back and say, well, here's what I saw in this room at this time. And then you could go call somebody up and say, go check and see if that's it. Remote viewing is being able to get information about someplace that you're not, or that you don't know about, that you don't have any normal ways of getting information. So that's why I call it paranormal. Again, paranormal just means it's something that people don't understand yet. Once you understand consciousness, then it's not paranormal. It's just normal. It's just the way we are. It's part of being human, that you can do these things, but you don't do them very well if you don't train for it. So anyway, fear is this key thing. And how you get rid of fear, first, you have to realize you have it, start looking for it. And, I have any number of young guys when I tell them this, well, you make a lot of your decisions based on fear. And these young guys, usually in their early 20s, they'll say, I don't have any fear. No, I'm not afraid of anything. And I don't have much ego either. I'm not big on myself. And I say, well, just keep working on it and ask yourself, where your choices come from? Why do you make the choices you make? All your little choices, all your everyday choices, what to say, what not to say, who to talk to, what to do. And I hear from them in an email, about 3 months later, and it's like, oh my God, I realize that every choice I make is made out of fear. I'm nothing but fear. That's what runs my life. That's how I decide what to say and who to talk. It's all about fear. All about my image. Is it going to come across right? What are people going to think? Is she going to like me? Is she not going to like me? This and that is the whole life is based on fear. And most of it's fear of being inadequate, fear of not being lovable, fear of being made fun of, not accepted, just fear. And almost everybody makes probably 80% of their choices based on fear. Fear and ego and beliefs. Those things is what makes you go through your day. And as we said, it's a trap. It limits the information you can process. So those beliefs are a problem, like believing that you can't do it. Well, make it such that you won't do it because you believe you can't. So first, you have to understand that you are full of fears. And by doing that, you just get honest with yourself and say, how do I choose everything I do? What am I going to do? Where am I going to go to eat? What am I going to order? What is my conversation? What kind of career am I have? How do I interact with my boss? What do I say? How am I at work? Just your whole life, relationships with your children, with your spouse. And you'll find out that most of it is fear-based. And once you realize that,
okay.
Yeah. Once you realize it's fear-based, then you got to say, okay, how has my fear informed my choices? Go back in your history, go back for the last 5 years and maybe 10 years and say, all right, the choices I made on where I went to college, what sport I played, what I did, what I didn't do, why I took this job rather than another job and so on. And you will see that you are how you are today because of all the fear choices that you've made in the past. And that should give you enough encouragement to change. You can see that it's been a problem. It's created issues in your relationships and at work and every place else. And you realize how much damage this fear has done to you in your life. That gives you the incentive to change it. Otherwise, you'll never change it. You'll say, yeah, okay, fear, yeah, okay, everybody has it, and you go on. But if you realize how much trouble it's caused you, all those things in your life where it's been problem, where you've felt, you're back up against the wall. Oh, no, man, how come I going to get through this? All those places, it's all been your fears created those things. So once you come to that realization, now you can change it. First thing is accept it. All right, I am fearful. The next thing you need to do is to become authentic, and that takes courage. You have to stop playing to your image. You have to stop worrying about what people are going to think of you, whether he likes me or she likes me or the rest of it. You have to just be authentic. And most people will have to take some months with that, because if you ask them, well, who's the authentic you? They have no idea who the authentic them is, because they've been playing it to their fear and to their image and to what people thinks of them, to make this nice little comfortable spot in life for them. And it's terrifying to tear those walls down. Who am I going to be when I'm authentic? Yeah. And is everybody going to hate me when I'm authentic? Is everybody going to see all the warts and all the things that I hide all the time when I'm authentic? Well, it takes courage. So you have to take the courage to just be who you are. Now, who you are may or may not be very nice. Who you are may be very self-centered, very grabby, who knows. But be who you are and see how that plays. See how it affects people. Ask the people close to you, do you notice any change in how I am? Or, if you have any opinions, if I annoy you or something, let me know. I'm just experimenting here and seeing who I am. Be authentic. That may take a year, just finding out who you are and being authentic and building up the courage to do that. And then you have to be aware of how you affect others. And if the way you affect others is negatively, then you need to change yourself. That's not good. If the way you affect others is positively, then that's good. You're on the right track. So if your relationship is full of squabbles and anger and problems, then don't say, well, it's her fault or it's his fault. Say, what can I do to change this? How can I be different? Stop blaming everybody else for your problems. Take responsibility that if you've got problems, they're your problems. Accept everybody else, they are just the way they are. Now, I need to be in a way that I can live positively with them. How am I going to change me to do that? Well, you're not going to be able to do that if all you care about yourself. If it's, but why do I want to live positive with them? They have to change. I'm right and they're wrong. You see, it's that ego gets in the way, those beliefs. Then suddenly you can't get rid of the fear because it's all tied up with your beliefs. So take responsibility, change yourself. You're the only person you can change. Do it in such a way that the people around you are happy. The people around you are smiling. And there's not a lot of fighting and anger and angst and unhappiness and crying, and all that stuff goes away. There's a lot of joy. Change yourself to make that happen.
Totally.
You see, that's the thing. So it's about you, not about others. If you say, well, I'm angry because so-and-so makes me angry, now you choose to be angry. So-and-so can be however they are, and you don't have to be angry. You can let that go. You can grow beyond getting angry with that thing. You see, you can and when you do that, magic happens. So-and-so stops being so annoying. Because part of the reason they're annoying is because of the stuff you push back at them. And then they push that back at you, and it's just going back and forth. And that's why they're so annoying. It's because you're so annoying to them. And once you stop being so annoying to them because you're just trying to make everything happy, then they'll stop being so annoying. And suddenly your whole relationship with everybody starts to get better. Everybody's happier. It's not just you. And as you give them that ability to be themselves, they'll start changing themselves. It spreads. Sort of like COVID-19. You get your life straightened out and the people around you catch it from you. They start to straighten their life out some, you see. But the only person you can start with is you.
And I find that incredibly, obviously, that is a life motto that I've tried to exhibit, one that I definitely also want to spread. And I just want to touch on the fact that what you were speaking to your fears, obviously, to first locate it, and then to essentially, attack might be the wrong word for it, but you essentially need to go towards that fear to give it understanding, to give some sort of awareness and attention, some sort of thought power into that fear to understand A, why it's there, and B, what it is that you can do about it. Many times we might fear something, and then how many times it's happening, and this happens with procrastination as well, that you don't do a thing that you possibly fear. You put your attention on it, and it just dissolves so easily, whether it's a little paper that you needed to write, or somebody was asking to speak with you and you kind of delay it, and whatever it is, these things that you fear, a whole lot of times when you put your true attention and true thought power on them, they really do. It's almost inevitable that they are not as big of an issue as you've created. It's just so rare that is the case. I really don't know if I've ever found that to be, the case. So I definitely agree with that on a whole. I don't know what else we would want to. Is there anything else you might want to add to the people? This has been one of the most interesting podcasts we've done for sure. Is there anything else you would want to throw, or any place you would want to end on?
Yeah, while we're on this thing of fear, you're right. The fear always turns out to be a paper tiger. It always turns out to be a belief, something you took on. And often you take these things on when you were a child. Often you pick this stuff up when you're 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 years old. Mama brings presents back to your siblings, but doesn't give one to you. Well, she didn't give one to you because you're 3 years older than they are, and she didn't think you wanted a teddy bear, but she brings teddy bears to the 2 younger ones, but you feel left out. And from then on, you have this feeling of not being good enough. You see, something silly, something as trivial as that from a child view, that's important. It can create these kinds of things. Just that simple a thing can create it. And now all the rest of your life, now here you are 60 years old, and you're angry and you're upset because you just never feel like you've ever succeeded and you're ever good enough. And you have trouble with people because you come on a little belligerent and a little forceful because you're trying to, get out there and be accepted. And of course, what that does is make people do just the opposite. They just push back at you. And, it's just paper tigers. Whenever you get that fear and you own it, you can't get rid of anything you don't own. When you said you have to be with it some, you have to own it and accept it. And then if you can just let it go, if you can say, oh man, it was just, I didn't get that teddy bear when I was 6 years old. Gee, is that it? Is that why I've been feeling this way? Then sometimes you can just let it go and poof, it's off your shoulders. Other times it's not that easy. Sometimes it takes time. But one thing that will always work is that if you remember I said you could change future probability with an intent? If you have a strong being level intent to get rid of that fear, you will. It will just go away. It'll take some time, but it'll go away. Now, you don't have the idea that I don't want to act like that. Don't say that. Oh, I don't want to act angry like that. It's not about acting. It's about being. I don't want to be angry like that. It's not about acting kind toward people. It's about being kind toward people. There's 2 different things. One's an image you're playing to, and the other is the real you. You see? So that's dealing with your fears. If you start it, the first one's the hardest one. After that, the next one's easier, and the next one's easier. And pretty soon you can shed this stuff like a dog shaking water off its back. You can get rid of it really quickly. But that first one may take you a year or 2 years or 3 years to get through. But when you do, this weight will come off of your shoulders and everything will be easier in your life. So here this is, a theory of consciousness, does better physics, and actually tells you how to live your life in a way that makes you happy and makes your relationships and everybody around you happy. It just makes things better. And not by changing other people, but by changing you and your perception.
Totally.
Again, it's just like the reason physics hasn't been able to see virtual reality for all these years, even though they knew that reality was information back in 1920. They knew it, but they haven't been able to see it because they had the wrong perspective. Their perspective was materialism and determinism, and it just couldn't get from there to here. It didn't work out. You can't get to it through that mindset. And that's been the scientific mindset. So in order to go forward, you have to change your beliefs. And so it has been with science and everything else. When we thought we were at the center of the world and not just a planet going around a sun, then, wow, we had to change our whole attitude about the nature of the larger world. The whole cosmology changed. Well, that's the way it is now. And then we found out that the world wasn't flat. We had to change our whole idea about the nature of things and where things were. And it's like this now. This is one of those big paradigm shifts where once you get the right perspective that this is a virtual reality and understand what that means, it's not just that doesn't mean that your future self has created this reality and it's still all materialist. No, consciousness is the computer. You understand that, then suddenly everything that was kind of cockeyed and sideways and paradoxical just falls right into place, and all the pieces of the puzzle come together. And not only that, you start smiling and become a happy guy. And life gets good. Your relationship with your kids and your wife and your boss and everything gets better. So it's a big toe. It's about everything.
Yeah. Then that is awesome, guys. I'm checking the book out right now. We will link to everything that Tom is doing and has done. We'll link to his channel as well. So those of you guys that are just listening, please come over to the 11th Commandment. Check out the links. Check out Tom Campbell's YouTube channel and all the stuff that they're doing. Tom, thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome, William, or William John. Which do you prefer, William? Just the William or the William John? I'm so happy, actually, that someone has called me William. It's been the only person that called me, my mom has now passed. She would call me William from time to time. Everybody calls me Will John. Now, what I did is when I moved, I've been in Europe for probably like 10, 12 years, something like this. I don't even count anymore. I go by my middle name most of the time, which is Oluremi. And so most people will call me just Rami in Europe. Mm-hmm. So if you would have met me in Europe, you call me Rami. If most people in the US, they call me Will. So it's really funny also for Americans that I meet in Europe. Yeah. When we're back at home, they call me Rami and other people Will. It's all confusing for them. I've created this split in my world. But William, if you want to call me William, please do. It's great. But no, thanks again, obviously, for being here. This was awesome. And we'll link out to everything for you here soon. Okay. Well, it's been my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. And I hope your listeners find some value in it, because that's the whole point, right?
Definitely.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity, and maybe we'll do it again sometime.
I'd love to. All right. We'll see you guys later. Thanks.